Last spring, I had a setback during the height of the garden planting season that opened my eyes to what my garden and, more importantly, what my life as a gardener over the last 10 years had become. As a result, this year's garden is going to look very different, from the expansion of my kitchen garden to the reduction of the main crops in my food garden. Whereas preserving has been a staple in my plan for a decade, I'll actually be doing very little canning this year. Here's what happened last year, why I'm making these changes, and what I hope this year's garden will end up being. In February last year, I was pruning my blueberry bushes and I hurt my back. What I thought was just a small setback ended up not getting any better. I pushed myself when I shouldn't have, and I ended up getting worse. I couldn't bend over to do anything in the garden, and even squatting was painful. Eventually, I got an MRI, and a few months later, it showed a herniated disc, among other issues. Thankfully, my husband, kids, and nephew pitched in and helped me with projects like building and repairing new raised beds, putting the straw bale garden in place, and of course, planting. My best friend came over and connected my garden in minutes garden irrigation with the help of her sweet daughter. One day when I was in the garden, I needed to thin my carrots, and I had already asked my family to do so much, I decided I was going to figure it out on my own. To do this, I had to lie on my stomach. In the midst of being so grateful, of course, for all the help of those around me, I felt so helpless, frustrated, angry. You see, I had already had back surgery in 2015 for a herniated disc, same place but on the other side, and I feared that I'd have to go through all of that again. Thankfully, I didn't. Physical therapy helped this time, and I 100% believe that God had a hand in my healing as well. By the summer, I was back to almost 100%, but the whole experience caused me to reevaluate everything I was doing in my garden. I think sometimes we get in the habit of doing the same things the same way, and it takes something like that for us to think, is this really what I still want to do? You see, when I started my garden in 2013 as a new stay-at-home mom, my goal was to grow as much as I could to help provide for our family financially. Preserving was a huge part of that. But now, I'm not the same person. I'm not at the same stage of life. I want to get back to enjoying my garden instead of feeling like a slave to it many months of the year. So this year, I'm taking a break in some areas and I'm expanding in others. That leads me to the crops that I'll be cutting out from my garden in 2024. Crop number one that I'm going to be cutting out is paste tomatoes. Now, I love canning tomatoes and being able to have tomato products year-round on our pantry, and I even talked in this video about fantastic paste tomato varieties that I learned just about last year. So it's kind of sad for me in a way to be putting a pause on canning tomatoes, but that honestly was a big area of my life that commanded so much time. Not only did it take up my entire July, but obviously caring for 35 to 50 tomato plants each year takes up a lot of time. So this year, I'm going to take a break from the paste tomatoes. Thankfully, last year was a bumper crop tomato year, so I was able to can more than I ever have. Hopefully that'll last me through this season. We'll see. But I'll be focusing on a few key slicing tomatoes for fresh eating throughout the year instead. Crop number two is spice peppers. Now, I encourage you to grow peppers that you can dry and grind for your own spices, like cayenne pepper and paprika and chili powder, but I have plenty of that. I've actually grown so much over the past couple of years that I have plenty to last me for the next couple of years. And that's just an area that I don't really need to do this year. I will come back to it eventually because I do love growing my spice peppers. But in a year that I am trying to cut back, this is definitely an area that I'm able to. Crop number three that I'm cutting out are specialty peppers for the most part. I'm a sucker for peppers in seed catalogs. And I say a sucker because we don't eat a ton of peppers besides bell peppers, obviously, but there's so many fun varieties of peppers that we're tempted to buy and enjoy from the seed catalog. And I've gone all out in past years, especially last year. I was trying white peppers and chocolate peppers and Jimmy Nardellos and all these other peppers. And I realized last year that most of them didn't actually get used. There's only a few specialty peppers that we like to throw on the grill, and those I'm going to be growing, but for the most part, it'll just be a few. So I'm cutting back on that particular temptation when it comes to the seed catalog, and I'm not growing as many specialty peppers. Number four is dry beans. This was another one that was a fantastic experience for me last year, growing pinto beans, black beans, kidney beans. Well, the kidney beans weren't so great, but the pinto beans and the black beans, I got several half-gallon jars full. We still haven't gone through them all. And this is probably one I'll come back to because we do enjoy eating beans. And I really believe that the ones that we're growing in our garden are going to be more nutritious than their counterparts in the grocery store. But this is an area that I've decided to cut, partly because it requires a lot of space. And even though once you plant them, they don't really require a whole lot of maintenance, planting that many beans in a home garden can be a little bit time consuming. And then you've got the harvesting and the shelling out. And that's just an area I've decided to cut for time's sake this year. I'm sure I'll return to it at some point, but for this year, I'm not going to be growing them. And number 5 is a crop that I have grown for 10 years straight, and I've never not grown it, but I'm going to not grow pole green beans this year. One reason is that I had such a good green bean harvest last year that I canned a lot, and I don't really think I'm gonna need to can any green beans this year. If I realize that our stock is running low, and I do, I will plant bush beans in my green stock vertical planter. That is an excellent way to be able to get bush beans. For the pole bean area in my garden, I have an A-frame trellis that is over 10 years old, and we've decided to stop moving it just because it's definitely showing its age. And instead of continuing to grow the pole beans in that location like I've done the past couple of years, I'm going to let that area rest, maybe plant a cover crop, and then I can return to pole beans in the future if I want. So you can see a little bit of a theme here. The places that I'm cutting back are the crops that either need to be preserved or they take up a lot of space. And in the case of the peppers, it doesn't really require a whole lot of extra time. But what I found is that when you're growing a lot of crops, every little crop takes a little bit of time, and that eventually adds up. So I tried to be very strategic about what I am keeping in my garden because I know that each crop is going to take up a little bit of time, and that does add up. So if I'm not focusing so much on stealth food production for the purpose of preserving, what am I going to be doing with my garden this year? Well, here's what I'm focusing on instead. Number 1, fresh crops. My goal in my zone 8A, where we can grow, well, this year I've grown a winter salad garden year round, but a lot of crops we can grow usually from March through November to December. So that's a very large window of being able to grow fresh crops in my garden. So I'm going to be focusing on succession planting and eating in season and really planning out my garden to be able to have fresh crops as long as I can. To be able to do that, I'm also expanding and developing a new kitchen garden for that purpose. The kitchen garden will be focused on fresh food, eating food that I can access right outside my back door. Which brings me to number 3. I want to enjoy more of my garden just steps from my back door. I know that might sound strange because it's not like my garden is that far away from my house, but when it comes to going outside and picking a pepper for dinner or a tomato that you want to whip up for salsa real quick, it is so much more enjoyable just to be able to step right outside and to be able to see the garden from inside the house. I'm realizing more and more how much I enjoy that. For me then, I'm going to be leaning into that space right outside my door. My greenhouse, my new kitchen garden, my raised beds that are already there, and my green stock. So hopefully I'll be able to enjoy the fresh food eating more and more. And that brings me to number 4. My goal this year is to ultimately lean into enjoying the garden. That's something that I think I've let slide over the years in the quest to produce more. This year, I want my garden to be a balm. I want it to be something that I enjoy doing. And of course, it's going to be hard work. Gardening is, but I want to try to achieve as much as I can a balance between the production and the enjoyment. And if that takes letting go of some things, then that's what I'll do. You may be wondering then, what am I going to do with my big garden out here? This is probably 2,500 square feet. It's a large space. I am definitely not going to give it all up. There are some crops that I will still be growing out here, and most of them are crops that need more space than my kitchen garden can provide, or they're crops that I'm still growing a lot of because I do want to grow a lot for preservation purposes. Just a couple of them though. Number 1 is beets. I absolutely love pickled beets. I eat them in my salad every single day. So for me, being able to have a huge harvest of beets is something that brings me joy year round and is worth the little bit of effort that it takes. Number 2, onions. Onions are a crop that I really want to continue growing more and more of to be able to last myself throughout the year. I'm going to be experimenting with different varieties and even succession planting, things I've never done before, to hopefully achieve that goal where it won't be a matter of do all the onion harvest at once, cure them, and let's see how long they'll last, but I'm hoping to be able to plant a little bit more strategically to be able to get a longer harvest. I'll share more about that in an upcoming video because I've got some strategies that I've never heard before, but I'm going to try them out and see how they do. Number 3 is corn. When I started thinking about what our family really loves and enjoys, it is fresh corn on the cob in the summer. The problem with corn, however, is that you have to plant a lot of it to get complete pollination, and then it ends up harvesting all at once. Now, this is great if you want to preserve, like last year I froze a lot of corn and I've loved that over the winter time, but my family really loves fresh corn on the cob. So what I'm going to do this year is I'm planting 3 different varieties of corn that all have slightly different days to maturity, and the goal is to be able to get fresh corn on the cob for a longer period of time rather than just a week or 2 in the summer. Because I'm not growing as much in my garden, I'm going to try again planting a lot of this corn in some of my larger raised beds. The last time I've done this, it didn't work out so well, but I know a lot of people do want to grow corn in raised beds, so I'm going to give it another go. I'm also going to, for sure, make room for my very favorite food, which is watermelon and also cantaloupe, and they require a little bit more space. I could put that in the kitchen garden, but because I like to grow so many different varieties of watermelon, I'm going to put them in some of my raised beds out here and give them plenty of space to ramble. Basically, for the big garden, I'm going to be focusing on the few foods that I will be trying to preserve, like beets and onions, and then also fresh food that needs a little bit more space than I could provide in my kitchen garden. I'm also in the space that I am not planting, so I'm not planning on planting anything in my in-ground garden at all at this point. I'll be adding cover crops, flowers in the garden so that I can help build that soil up, and in the future I can be able to plant in soil that's had a year to rest. For me, these are some big changes, but the biggest one is the building, development, and planting of my new kitchen garden area. Come along with me. In the next few weeks, I'm going to be sharing with you how I selected the raised beds, the location, how I built them, how I design them, what kind of irrigation that I'm going to use, and also how I'm going to plant them. Make sure you're subscribed so you can see that whole process coming up in the weeks to come. I'm excited to share this process with you because I am fortunate to have as much property as I want to be able to plant a large garden. We have 3 acres out here, but that is not the case for everyone. So if you're just growing in a kitchen garden, I'm hoping that my way of being able to grow fresh food as long as I can in that kitchen garden will inspire you and give you some tips to be able to grow that in your own.